Good morning and welcome to this afternoon's Artist Talk. Oops, let me just do this. I am Lillian Thorpe, the director of Nancy Margolis Gallery. Today, Nancy Gruskin will discuss the paintings in her debut solo exhibition with the gallery, Invented Vessels. Fellow artist and educator Maureen Nathan will moderate the conversation, and we're very thankful that she could join us today. Before we jump in, I'd like to share a little bit of background about both of our speakers. Nancy Gruskin lives and works in Concord, Massachusetts. Gruskin received her BA in Art History and Studio Art from Connecticut College and her PhD in Art History from Boston University. Her work has appeared in solo and group exhibitions throughout the United States and is included in private collections across the country and abroad. Gruskin spends much of her time teaching painting, collage, and digital drawing, including classes at the Concord Center for the Visual Arts in Massachusetts. Our moderator, Maureen Nathan, is a British artist and educator based in London. Her visual narrative is the culmination of observation, perceptual thinking, and memory. Nathan's work has been exhibited with the Royal Society of Portrait Painters, the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, Wells Art Contemporary, and the Royal West of England Academy. Next month sees the opening of her first solo exhibition in London. After Gruskin and Nathan's discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Feel free at any point during the discussion to type a question or a comment in the chat box, and I will read it aloud at the end. You may also click on the raise hand icon, and I will call on you during the Q&A period. Without further ado, I am honored to hand it over to Maureen.
Hello, and thank you very much, Lillian. I am delighted to be able to have a chat with Nancy about the work that she's showing with the Nancy Margolis Gallery. Nancy and I have known each other, I think, for about 6 or 7 years, and we met via social media, which I am extremely grateful for. We cemented our friendship in real life here in London a few years ago, and I guess what we've done over those years is spend a lot of time talking about our work, why we make it, what should we do with it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's great to be able to carry that conversation forward in a more public forum, and especially focusing on the work that's in this show. And I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for asking me to moderate, both of you.
Of course.
Thank you, Maureen.
So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Is that all right, Lillian?
Yes, that looks perfect.
Okay, great. There's a slideshow of images that were selected by Nancy for this artist talk. She didn't really give me any background. She said I could hunt for clues, and she's smiling there because she knows she's a trickster. But I suggest we just get right to them and find out more about them. This is the first image selected. The details are there. And Nancy, looking at this first one, it made me realize that over the period that I have known you, your work, it's become more reductive. And I wonder, looking at it now, is this conscious, or has this evolved over time? And earlier today, I was thinking, does it have anything to do with your recent focus on ceramics and the 3D work that you're making, the cardboard and wood pieces?
I think it is conscious. I think that there, over the last few years, I've tried hard to think about what is it that I need to convey what attracts me to a particular subject matter in the first place, and leave out all of the things. It's sort of a liberating feeling in a way, realizing that as a painter, I could omit the things that don't interest me and really focus on the things that do. And I suppose the connection to ceramics has to do with just in general kind of seeing the world in shapes, which is also somewhat reductive. But yeah, I think it has been conscious, trying to push myself to leave out more and more and see what I could do with less.
Yes, yes, and emphasizing what's important to you. I wanted to say also about this piece, you know, these arms and hands that feature in your work, I presume that those are yours.
They are.
Okay, because I find in this particular image in particular quite moving, because you are actually, it's an embrace, and you're enclosing these vessels, which one is full and very decorative, and the other is not. It's almost like fecundity and emptiness, which I think it's quite emotional. I wonder if you have that intention when you start to make these pieces, or?
It started to read to me that way as well. It was not my intent from the beginning, but I think the, well, I think still life paintings in general, and I think it's probably true for you as well, are, to me, are self-portraits to begin with, right? They're, you know, you're working, at least I'm working with objects that have, you know, I have formal interest in, but I also have a personal attachment to. And at the start of the series, when we were still in quarantine for the most part, the ceramic studio was closed, I was making a lot of paper mache objects to make 3D vessels. And so it's such a hands-on process. It felt important that I be in these paintings, and that it was really about my hands and making, and you know, how the series came about.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, that strikes me of huge interest, because in lockdown, and when we were not able to go out, for instance, for you to the ceramic studio, and for me, I made a book of collages, and the actual, I remember talking to you about this, the fact of using my hands to make this, much like you with the papier-mâché, it was almost remedial and comforting.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And I think the other thing that's apparent looking at this particular image and throughout the works in the show is the duality, which is very apparent. I like the balance that this gives the composition. And I'm now seeing also that it has a certain emotion, you know, positive and negative. But let's go to this next image. Let's see, here we are. Brown vessel, red tulip. Now, you know, I thought about whether or not to say this, but for me, when I saw this the first time and subsequently, I see a shouty boy in green trousers. And I see a hand, presumably yours, which I know to be true, gesturing him to slow down, waving a tulip. Now I've tried to see a brown vessel, and you know, this little boy's got a black mouth. He wants something from me, and thankfully we can all, you know, bring our own vision to work. But the recurring tulip shape, that's also a vessel of sorts. And the two decorative elements anchor the design. With your use of black, really pushes the action, vessel or boy, forward. Now, Matisse comes to mind, and you might want to say something about your affection for his work, but I'm also interested in why tulips are such an important motif in your work.
As for the tulips, I think it's twofold. I think as a flower, I very much appreciate their form, right? They have this kind of architectural quality. They're not fussy like roses or peonies, and there's something reductive about them in the flower world that kind of works for my world view. But I also have a sentimental attachment to them. When they just remind me of when I was in my 20s and I'd first moved to Boston and I had my own place for the first time. And there are, they're not really there anymore. There used to be flower stalls at every kind of major T subway station in Boston. And once a week I would buy tulips and put them in my apartment and feel very grown up. And so the association for me is with that particular time in my life.
I love that. I love that. And what about Mr. Matisse?
Oh gosh, do you have 10 hours? I mean,
well, you know, I mean, when I see decorative elements in your work, you know, I know sometimes you give a nod to Bonnard, but Matisse, I know you are, you know, yeah, 10 hours. Okay, well, give us a minute, would you? Could you?
He makes me feel that it's okay to be decorative, to think about surface and color relationships, and that joy is okay. You know, that there's I'm always blown away by artists who filter the great tragedies of the world in their work. But I tend to go the opposite direction, and it's an escape for me, mentally and physically. And for, you know, he's a model in that way for allowing beauty to be an okay thing.
Well, beauty is certainly very evident in your work. I think also, I might have referred to it in the previous image, the emotion that I'm seeing in this work. And I think that is also, you know, you said that you escape and involve yourself in the work. For, you know, the last 2 years that we've all been through have been hugely traumatic, however comfortable we might be. You know, we've never lived through anything like this before. And I do see personally more evidence of, you know, real feeling in your work, which, you know, is not that I didn't before, but I see a lot more of it that could, and, you know, how could I not?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about it, you know, with as lucky as we are in so many ways, it clearly has had an impact. And it, the studio, particularly, I have a home studio, I work from home, so I've had access to it the entire time, and it's become, you know, a real refuge in so many ways, and a place when we were all home, everyone in the family home working.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful place to go to, and I don't know how it wouldn't impact the work at some point.
Sure. Well, you know, a place of safety, definitely. I think that will resonate with lots of artists watching this and listening, most definitely. And I'm glad that you haven't said anything to me to upbraid me about my shouty boy. I wonder sometimes if it's your son, but
you know, I love that interpretation of it. The green shape in this actually came from, which happens a lot in my work. I do a lot of collage work as well, and I will put those up on the studio walls. And, you know, a lot of these compositions are fairly invented, and there will be moments when I have no idea what to do in a painting. And so I will look at a collage on the wall, and that's what happened here. That green shape came literally from a collage that I had done of an entirely different subject matter. And I thought, oh, well, that's a great shape.
Yes, and it should. I mean, your skill, you know, apart from anything else, in creating a good design and good composition, to my mind, is also you've taken that color and you've put it on your sleeve. So again, there's that duality, that resonance. You know, it's sort of like the triangle from the decorative element to the sleeve to the trousers, which you know, I always find super attractive in your work.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, shouty boy is off. Now, Marimekko Curtin, something that we do have in common is a huge love for textiles, both of us, especially decorative textiles. And this is also the hero image, as they call it, for your show of paintings. you know, again, we have empty and full vessels. We have pairs. We have, you know, forward motion. Again, you see, we've got an empty vessel here. We have a full vessel here, and that's your hand, the maker, a jug. It's a very bold and dynamic composition. Now we know that it's your hand. And do, you know, do the empty and full vessels reference events again, you know, in your own life?
It's a good question, and maybe subconsciously they do. I can't,
you know,
just be doing it
I mean,
deliberately.
And sadness, you know, because you are you're a very open-minded person, and you also can see both sides of things, you know, when we have conversations. So I'm not surprised to see this balance in your work. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious.
I think it also has to do with this. I am always kind of torn between surface pattern and decoration and more kind of big patches of color. And it may have something to do with that as well, that a certain indecision on my part about how to proceed.
Okay. I admire your honesty.
Yeah.
I always do. I mean, that's what I look to you for. So I'm going to ask you, can you please be honest about the banana?
The banana, Freud be damned, the banana is a great shape. And when I started making paper mache objects at the beginning of the pandemic, which is something I used to do as a kid all the time. I had a zoo full of paper mache animals at one point. The banana was the first thing I made, I think. It just was such, you know, a great shape to make and fun to make. So.
Okay, well, we'll leave the banana there.
Banana,
I noticed too that this is a great photograph that you've given us for, to look at, because there's a lot of surface detail in the paintwork. How do you begin when you're starting these? Do you paint the ground? Do you plan ahead? Or you know, is it call and response? How do you start these pieces? Do you paint a surface and then begin, or what?
It's always, well, it's often a little different for these paintings. A lot of these started out actually as sketches on my iPad with the Procreate, the drawing application. Because I find, you know, because I'm sort of inventing so much, it's a little daunting to start with a blank canvas or panel in this case. But if I get out paper and paint to try to do studies, I feel like the studies are always better than the painting. And
yeah, I've heard you say that before.
It's true. I feel like it, you know, that's done, and then I have to figure out something new. But if there's something about the digital drawing that is just different enough from painting that I can sketch in that and then still feel like I have interest enough to make the painting.
Right.
And things change along the way. Like I don't usually, you know, I go right onto a white panel, and because I like watering down the paint and being able to see the surface sometimes, and other places are more opaque. And I'll just,
which is very evident in the finished piece. So you don't start out thinking, I'm going to make this picture with the jug on the left and the shape on the.
It's usually more of a, you know, sometimes it's even just a color. I want to make a painting about a certain color, or sometimes like this one, I think I had a vision of that Marimekko textile, but it's not, I don't have a full vision in mind, and it is a bit of call and response, put something down and
yeah. Well, there's definitely always a conversation in your pictures, which is, I'm sure, comes from that. I mean, and a liveliness too, which I like very much. Okay. Now I was going to ask, oh no, hang on. I think it's the next one I had a question about. Here we are. Bonnard's table. a reference to the master of color, light, and pattern. To my mind, more so than Matisse, but it's a different issue. Now, this is another dynamic composition referencing vessels and real and imagined, as we know, because this is imaginary vessels. But when referencing real vessels, I do want you to answer this. Is it simply an aesthetic consideration, or does personal meaning prompt your choice? Because I know that you like some things, you really like them. And so, do they get in the picture because you like them so much, or do they get into the picture because they complement the composition, or tell us what's going on with all of these things?
Oh, they get in because I like them. And I always tell that to students too, paint what you like. And I feel like that's half the battle, right? So that it's like a little blue willowware bowl on top of the stack. That's that exists in the real world. And
does it have personal meaning for you? Did it belong to somebody that you knew? Or? It
does. It belonged to my mother. And there's been a lot of that kind of thing the last couple of years too. My mother passed away. It'll be 5 years in June, but my father just passed away in January. So there's been, a lot of cleaning house and emotional issues. And so a lot of the things that showed up in this series belonged to my parents, or more specifically, my mother. And so it definitely has an emotional attachment.
Of course, which I think comes through in the work, as I said before. And I'm sorry about your father so recently. But I think also your painting is in a way a catharsis, isn't it, for channeling the way you feel about it. Because I think when you're painting, I know it's a way you're thinking in a way, aren't you? And maybe not entirely about what you're painting, but everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody said to me, you should make a painting of your father before this was a long illness. We knew what was going on, do that before. And it's just not the way I think about it.
I mean, I can't imagine you doing that, but
yeah.
Okay. The other thing about the dialogue between your painting and your current ceramic work, we're seeing the ceramics invented or made in your paintings, but will some of these motifs appear on the new clay vessels that you're making?
It's funny. I thought they would. Again, this kind of came out of frustration with I was signed up for the ceramics class in March of 2020. And needless to say,
well, we know what happened there.
We know what happened. So that's when I started making these paper mache vessels. And then I started just with paint creating vessels that I thought would be wonderful at some point when we got back into the ceramic studio to make. And then the studio reopened, and I discovered just how hard it is to make ceramic vessels.
Well, yeah, but you're beginning that, aren't you?
I am.
So I personally am not ruling anything out with you. Absolutely not. Now here I have another slide of finally these two images that Nancy chose to include here. And Nancy, you included them side by side. And is there a particular significance in that choice? I know you said I would find clues. And I found pairs of lemons, cups, bowls, a tulip in each, making two. And this duality gives these compositions and all of your compositions balance. But do the empty bowls and leaning tulips, I feel like they signify yearning or loss, and after what you've just been talking about, I think that might be true, referencing childhood activities, which still resonate with you, and, yearning and loss for, your parents.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. As an art historian, I'm used to thinking in pairs.
Okay.
And I didn't do, I tend to work on one painting at a time. I'm not somebody who has lots of things going.
Okay, that was another question I wanted to ask you. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until we talked about doing this and I said I would select some images, it wasn't until then really that I paired these two together, but I realized that they had so much in common.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Also, these are slightly more open in their composition. You've got more open spaces. And I think tulips are a signifier of your heart. You know, sometimes they're on their sides, sometimes they're upright, and sometimes they're waving at your son to say, slow down, I'm sure. But that is the selection of pictures that we put in the slideshow to talk to you about. And I'm sure, you know, people want to ask questions. So the more I looked at this work, the more I have to think about, and I like that. So questions from the floor, and thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you,
my dear.
Maureen.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Maureen.
Stop sharing, I will. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting to see Nancy's work through your vision. I really enjoyed that conversation. We do have a few questions coming in, and just a reminder that anybody can type a comment or a question into the chat box and I will read it aloud, or you can click on the raise hand icon. We briefly touched on this, but Kate was asking, Nancy, do you begin with an idea or narrative, a color, a certain shape? Thanks to Matisse and you for giving us permission to make beauty in pattern.
Yeah, it's you know, there's something in my head. It's almost like a fleeting side glance. It's either a color or there's some object that I really want to paint or a feeling. And I try not to sort of develop it further until I start painting, because I'm always sort of after a certain kind of freshness that I find if I do, I'm just not good at doing a lot of studies and working an idea out before I start painting.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. We have a question. Do you print out your Procreate work or just use it as a digital reference?
I do make drawings that I print out and they become things in and of themselves. When I use Procreate just to make sketches or studies that I know are leading towards paintings, I don't end up printing them out. I tend to make them and then I put them away, and I actually consciously try not to look at them when I go to make the painting.
That's interesting. Liffy has a question, which is, I don't want to pry inappropriately, but would you be willing to talk a little bit about your earliest experiences making art? I'm thinking about what art classes were like for you when you were in elementary school. Good experiences, not so good. And can you connect the dots from then until today?
Can absolutely connect the dots. I remember my earliest memories are I grew up in New London, Connecticut, and there is a museum there, the Lyman Allen Art Museum, and they had this wonderful program on Saturday mornings. And it's actually, my father grew up in the same town and he went as a small child as well. But they had three, what felt like at the time, massive studios, one for clay, one for painting, and drawing, and one for, like woodworking and other kind of crafts. And you would spend the 3 hours and 1 hour in each room. And I just fell in love with all of it then. And both of my parents were, they weren't professional artists, but they're creative. And, lucky enough, we had art in the house and went to museums. And so I went to college knowing that I wanted to study and major in studio art, but the art history came as a surprise. I thought I'd probably major in English along with studio art. And then I took an intro to art history with Ellen Shapiro. who taught at Connecticut College and then taught at Mass College of Art, and was this just incredibly dynamic, charismatic professor. And I fell in love with art history as well. So I had these kind of two parallel paths, but it's been very nice to come full circle and return to studio practice full time, because it hasn't been always like that.
Got it. Thank you. I love that your early education introduced all those mediums at once and allowed you to sort of experience them all simultaneously. Alex asks, how do you help students steer clear of the idea of rules and ways to find their own visual truth? Your work is free, welcoming, a visual treasure hunt. I am enthralled and could look at these all day.
Oh, thank you very much, Alex. Yeah, there are, I know some of my students are on the talk. There are no rules in my classes. I tend to, I give exercises with limitations because I personally like limitations in my own work. Like, you know, I don't know about, Maureen and I have talked about this, about feeling like there's endless possibility of directions to go in. And sometimes I just, you know, set rules like I'm going to make collages that are all 11 by 14 and I'm going to make 20 of them. And so I try to give exercises that have kind of parameters, but suggest lots of different avenues to go down. So I don't teach technique or really at all. It's more about, you know, here's an idea, why not make a collage and then cut it up and see what you can make with that. It's a little bit like elementary school art. Now that I think about it, it's very, you know, play, experiment, try it and see what happens.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Marissa asks, is there a medium you have not tried yet that is on your list for the future?
Oh boy. I'm sure there is. I'm open to anything. I always feel like there's not enough time, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'd love to do, next time I go to New London, I'm going to make Maureen teach me about her printmaking process, because I haven't tried that, and it's a fascinating kind of improvised as you go process. So
that's one thing I find so compelling about your work and following your career, is how experimental you are with many different media. And I love seeing how, you know, you combine those and move from one to the next. Okay, we have a question from Naomi. She asks, could you say a bit more about the feelings or associations that make the loose paint moving or compelling for you, and the contrast between opacity and the watered down paint? Is it about the contrast to the hard-edged and often more opaque collaged elements?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's about the way it feels to paint like that. Like, painting is such a wonderful physical feeling, to put color down and see brush strokes. And I'm drawn to paintings where I can see that like hand of the artist. I'm drawn to that in other people's work as well. But I also like kind of, and I think this maybe is connected to the collages as well, I sort of like opaque color as well. It's one of the reasons why one of my favorite paints is the acrylic gouache, because it can go either very loose and washy, or you can get a full strength opacity to it that you can't in acrylics and oils, you know, depending on the color.
Got it. Thank you. I'm curious, I know that this show was inspired by your personal foray into ceramics, and I'm curious, how actively are you in the ceramic studio making actual 3D vessels, and how does that tie in with your painting process?
I'm obsessed. I'm in there a lot. It's very addictive, and I think that's true anytime you play with a new medium. Like, it, you know, it's just exciting and new, and it's very addictive. So, and I'm starting to make some things that I actually am pleased with, and I think they will factor in to the work. I've already sort of been thinking, of starting a new series that's now not invented. It's the opposite of invented vessels, right? I'm painting the things that I've made that are coming out of the ceramic studio. So I like this idea of dialogue between different medium.
Got it. And then I was also just curious, I know that a lot of your still lifes are invented, but I'm wondering how much of them do you create props and do you set up a still life to paint? I know that a lot of it is still invented and fictitious, but how much of the arrangement is there, or a choreographed sense?
Yeah, there's very little of that. I don't set up any still life, and I have to credit another artist with that too, Elizabeth Blackadder, who is a Scottish painter who Maureen and I both worship, and she just passed away not too long ago, but I remember watching this video of her in her studio, and she was a collector surrounded by objects that she loved, and she was at work on a watercolor piece, and she would just pick up an object and look at it and add it to the painting. And she would, was clearly determining the composition just based on her own emotions and design knowledge. And to me, that was such a revelation, this idea that, not only do you pick the object that you want to paint, but you pick from what angle you want to paint it. And you don't have to worry about the rules of gravity or perspective or setting it up in front of you. There's a way of directly observing something without having it all arranged ahead of time. And that really affected my own work.
Thank you. Kate Hanlon actually made a comment about Elizabeth Blackadder and said that Night Kitchen is reminiscent of Elizabeth Blackadder. Lovely. And I have to admit, that's an artist I'm not too familiar with, so I'm definitely excited to look into her.
I think you'll love her work.
Awesome. Judy asks, do you think you will eventually have a clay studio at home?
I don't think so. I don't think so. No. I mean, I've already, I've taken over the biggest room in the house for painting and drawing, and I don't know. And there's something nice about going, particularly since I work from home and my studio's at home, there's something nice to going into this community ceramic studio and being around other artists and seeing what they're working on. I actually think I would miss it if I had the space to set one up here.
Got it. Let's see. Shell asks, do you still work in paper mache?
Yeah, I use it in a number of my classes. We do paper mache. It's one of those things that came about only because I started teaching online in addition to in person, and it's sort of easy for people to do paper mache at home. So yeah, I still make things. It's a lot of fun, and it's a nice way to sort of stretch your brain and work three-dimensionally.
Absolutely. I've never taken one of your workshops, but I can just tell you would be an excellent teacher. And I'm curious, how much does teaching propel your own work, or do you find inspiration from your students, or I'm just curious if there's a connection between teaching and then your own practice.
Very much so, and it works both ways. Often I come up with ideas for classes because of something I'm doing in my own practice, and then other times I come up with something for a class and it opens the door in my studio, and it leads to something in my own work. So it's it's one of those things that sometimes you think, oh, I need more studio time, and if I wasn't teaching so much, I would have that. But it, in many ways, it's really helpful to my own work. So it's a good thing to keep teaching.
Absolutely. One thing I noticed, I was sort of struck during your conversation with Maureen when you talked about the architectural traits of a tulip. And I remember that you told me that you wrote your dissertation on a female architect. And at first I was thinking, we don't really see a lot of architecture in your paintings. We don't see, you know, buildings, literal architecture, but there is something architectural about your paintings. And how does architecture or your background in architectural history play a part in your still life paintings?
That's a good question, Lillian. And I confess I haven't thought much about it. I do find tulips very, particularly the drama of when they're about to die is very, very architectural. But I don't know. I mean, maybe from a composition perspective, I haven't given it a lot of thought. And I mean, I have thought about the connection between studio art and art history. And in many ways, it's oddly not connected. Like I always thought it was strange in college and graduate school that studio art majors were required to take art history classes, but art history majors were not required to take studio classes. And I think that's terrible. I mean,
yeah,
you know, and to this day, you can tell when you're reading an art historian's work, and they've never picked up a brush, or they, you know, that there's something missing in their discussion of the work. So while I think it trained my eyes and I got to see lots of really good work as an art historian, I'm not sure it's had all that much impact on my studio practice.
Got it. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Christine asks a technical question. Is there a particular brand of acrylic gouache you use or prefer for your larger paintings?
So there are a handful of brands, and I'm pretty sure I've tried them all. I mostly prefer Holbein, which is actually a Japanese manufacturer, but I like the Holbeins, and Golden and Liquitex just came out with some, which for various reasons I don't like as much. But
Alex asks, where can we take workshops with you? I know you mentioned some online, so maybe, fill us in with how people can learn from you.
So the best way is probably to go on my website. I try to keep it up to date, and I don't tend to teach a lot during the summer months, so there's not much in the way of links on my website at the moment, but that's the best way to find out.
Perfect. One thing that is so prevalent in your work is color, and it's very clear that you have a great keen eye for color and you're attracted to it. Sort of a basic question, but is there a specific color you're most drawn to, or is there one you tend not to work with in your work, or how do you go about thinking about color?
Yeah, there are definitely colors I'm attracted to. That I keep thinking about Maureen's comment about the shouty boy in that painting, and that chromium oxide green is a favorite. And there were colors. For a long time, I did not use a lot of reds in my paintings for some reason, and I remember sort of consciously deciding one day that I needed to make some red paintings, and have come to grips with it as a color, and actually now use it quite a bit. But I'm kind of a color junkie. It's all good to me.
Right. This question is, will we be seeing a tulipier, excuse my French, soon in your paintings, since I know you love them and recently made one in clay?
Oh yeah, that one I made is definitely gonna show up. I'm happy with that one. Yeah. It's funny when I do the ceramics because, you know, I make them, they're 3-dimensional out of clay. And then when I'm thinking about how to glaze them, I take a photo of them. So it's a 2-dimensional photo, or I make a 2-dimensional drawing of them. And I make like a painting, basically figuring out ideas for glazing them. And so again, it's funny to me that I take a 3-dimensional object and I think about it 2-dimensionally and then bring it back to 3 dimensions, but it'll show up in the paintings. Yeah.
Well, they have bananas in them sometimes.
Of course, Maureen.
Excellent.
Let's see. Robin asks, you have said to your students to paint what we love, and you certainly do. And I wonder, how much do you look at these items when you paint, and how much is from memory?
There's a lot from memory.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't painted. There's a lot from memory, and I used to do that. I haven't done a lot of strictly figurative work lately, but when I used to paint my son more, he's now a teenager and would be horrified at the thought of me including him in a painting. But when I used to paint him, it was the same thing with him. I didn't need to look at him to paint him or even look at photos. You know, you just, once you start working with, whether it's a person or a vase, you get to a point where you can work from memory. And I think that's when it gets really good, that when you're just painting what you're responding to most, rather than being hung up on a lot of details that in the end don't make the work stronger necessarily.
That makes sense. Kat Bennett asks, I love your still lifes and wonder, as an art historian, if you think much about the history of still lives and how what you are doing deviates from the past, or does it matter? Do we need to think about history as artists? That's a really good question.
It is a good question, Kat. Kat's a great artist too. I think that the nicest thing about being an artist is that I can look at paintings from the past just for pure enjoyment, and rather than, as an art historian, you have to be very careful about placing everything in its proper historical and social and cultural context. And you don't have to do that as an artist. There was this great show at MoMA right before things closed down. I don't know if you saw it, Lillian, that Amy Silman curated. I think it was called The Shape of Shape at MoMA.
Right.
It was just that one room, and it was so interesting to me to see an artist curate the show as opposed to an art historian. And it covered every continent and every time period, and it was just about shape and her. It was so clearly from an artist's perspective that you can decontextualize all of those things and they can affect your work. And I love that. I don't miss that part about the historian side of things, of having to be, historically accurate.
Absolutely. Christine asks, do you formally contemplate a body of work before you begin, or does a body of work emerge organically?
I think it varies. Sometimes it's I'm thinking about it as a series or a body of work, and other times it just, I make something and I decide I want to keep playing with that idea or subject matter. So it varies.
This one is, from Gabe. Do you prefer working on a smaller or a larger scale when making paintings, or does it matter?
It does matter. And I think it depends on mood. Like, I don't know, there's probably a sweet spot. There's some size, it's somewhere in the kind of 24 by 30-ish range where I feel like I can fully move my arm and be a little more physical. But it's not so large that I can't kind of move over the panel or canvas quickly. But then there are other times, like watercolors, or I don't work a lot in watercolor, but I did some watercolors a year ago, and it just felt like I wanted to work small.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the medium and my mood, and so I guess the answer is it varies there too, but
yeah. Thank you. This question is, did you do a color theory course? If yes, can you recommend? If not, are your color choices intuitive?
yeah, no, I haven't taken a color theory class. I know there are lots of good ones out there, but no, it's pretty intuitive, I think. Or sometimes I'll see something, I'll see an item of clothing or a picture in a magazine that the color just appeals to me, and I'll steal that.
Right. Do you ever have periods of creative block in your studio? And do you have any advice for artists when they're feeling that way, and advice on how to push through those blocks if you experience those?
You should Skype with Maureen.
Right.
My first answer. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Who doesn't? I don't know. I tend to, I go with it. Like there are long periods where I'm not painting, and I know some people find they get to that point and they just go in and, say, I'm gonna play, I'm gonna paint, I'm gonna make whatever I'm gonna do until I get past that. But for me, I just kind of respect the block, and that's a good time for me to either go to museums, galleries, or to look at books, and it will happen again. So just I kind of ride it out.
Yep, that's definitely good advice. I know that art and museums and art history and colors inspire you, but what about literature or music? Do you have other outside inspirations, maybe other than the visual arts, that contribute to your work?
Yeah, I love to read. I'm a big fiction reader, although I can't say that has crept into the work much. And music is usually on when I'm painting. Some of the titles in this show come from lyrics that may have just been playing while I was painting. They don't really have much to do with subject matter so much.
Absolutely. Well, we are nearing the end of today's event, but I just wanted to give a reminder to everybody that Nancy's exhibition will remain on display through June 3rd in our online viewing room. And we have a beautiful printed catalog available of the work. You can purchase one by heading to our website. And I just thought this was a fantastic conversation, and I learned so much about your work, Nancy. And as I said, Maureen, it was so exciting to see the work through your eyes. And I really got so much out of that.
Thank you.
Well,
So
I was delighted to do it from, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Nancy, not to put you on the spot, but any closing thoughts, or does anyone have any last questions before we end today?
Just a genuine thank you to Maureen for so many things, but certainly for showing up on a Sunday evening for you, afternoon, evening for you, and many thanks to Lillian as well for organizing all of this.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for showing up. Amazing.
My pleasure, Nancy.
All right. Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you so much, Maureen, and to everyone for showing up. Have a great weekend.
Take care.